When you think of punk rock, you probably think of leather jackets, ripped jeans, and rebellion, spiky mohawks, and excess drinking in public. But what if you added old horror movies, zombies, coffins, and sci-fi monsters? A genre where punk rock meets classic horror, B-movie aesthetics, and gothic theatrics. It's loud, it's dark, it's a little bit campy, and for decades it's been one of punk's most fascinating underground movements. Today we're diving into horror punk.
Oh, you know how those young girls are. Not even that keep to put that pump
The horror punk really begins in the late 1970s. Punk was exploding in New York and London, and bands were rejecting polished rock music and embracing speed, attitude, and DIY culture. At the same time, there was a growing nostalgia for old horror movies, 1950s sci-fi monster flicks, and B-grade drive-in films. And one band saw a way to combine both of these worlds. That band was the Misfits. Formed in 1977 in New Jersey, the Misfits, led by Glenn Danzig, took punk's raw energy and wrapped it in imagery inspired by classic Universal monsters, Hammer horror films, George Romero's zombie flicks, and vintage sci-fi posters. They didn't just write punk songs, they wrote horror stories, set to distorted guitars and breakneck drums. By the early 1980s, this had become the blueprint for horror punk. So let's make that even clearer. The Misfits are the foundation of horror punk. I would even go to say that basically every other horror punk band just rips off the Misfits in some way. But without them, the genre literally wouldn't exist. Listen to songs like Last Caress, Hybrid Moments, Where Eagles Dare, and Astro Zombies. They combined three things: simple, catchy punk riffs, pop-style melodies, and horror-themed lyrics. Glenn Danzig's voice was another key ingredient. Unlike most punk singers, he had a deep, dramatic, almost Elvis-like croon. That gave the music a sense of theatrical drama. And then there was the image, the skull logo, the devil lock hairstyle, leather jackets, corpse paint. The Misfits turned themselves into walking horror icons. And even after the band broke up in 1983, their influence only grew. Bootlegs spread worldwide. Skaters, metalheads, goths, and punks all adopted the look. I bet you've seen at least a dozen Misfits shirts in your life. It doesn't matter how old you are. They became one of the most influential punk bands of all time. After the Misfits, other bands took the horror punk idea and they ran with it. In the 1980s and 90s, you saw bands like Samhain, Danzig's darker, more occult project, Morning Noise, The Undead, The Necros. But in the late 90s and early 2000s, horror punk saw a major revival. This was driven by bands like the early era of AFI, Balzac from Japan, Blitzkid, Calabrese, or the Crimson Ghosts. These bands mixed horror punk with hardcore punk, goth rock, pop punk, and even a little bit of metal. And suddenly, horror punk wasn't just a retro style, it was evolving. Scenes popped up in the US, Europe, and Japan. Festivals, tribute nights, and underground labels helped keep the movement strongly going forward, thriving, not just surviving. So what actually makes something horror punk? Musically, it's built on classic punk foundations. It's faster mid-tempo rhythms, power chord riffs, simple song structures, short and punchy tracks. But there are some key differences. First, there's melody. Horror punk leans heavily on catchy hooks and sing-along choruses. Second, atmosphere. Many bands use minor keys, surf rock style guitar lines, in modern days often influenced by black metal, reverb and tremolo, and then organs or synths. And to create a spooky cinematic feeling, often features sampled vocals or snippets from horror films directly. And third, the vocals. You'll often hear deep crooning, gravelly snarls, ghostly backing vocals, or theatrical delivery. And finally, the elephant in the room, the lyrics. Horror punk songs are basically horror short stories. They are full of zombies, vampires, serial killers, aliens, graveyards, apocalypse scenarios. Sometimes they're serious, sometimes they're funny, and often they're a little bit of both. It's horror as entertainment, not horror as realism. It's not grindcore, it's more grindhouse. So who is carrying the torch? While horror punk remains underground, it's far, far from dead. One could even go so far as to say it's undead. Some of the most important modern bands include Blitzkid, Calabrese, Balzac, Nim Vind, The Other, Wednesday 13, his solo work and his work on the Murder Dolls. But there's also my friends in the 1428, who you might know from their work before as Dr. Geek and the Freak Show. Many newer bands are blending horror punk with psychobilly, metalcore, darkwave, and post-punk. You can deep dive into psychobilly and horror punk's connection, and you can definitely find something for your taste in Frenzy or Bloodsucking Zombies from Outer Space. Social media and streaming have also helped the scene survive without major labels. You'll find active communities on Bandcamp, on YouTube, and obviously on Reddit. It's far, far influenced scenes beyond its own. You can hear it in influencing modern goth rock, in metal. Ice Nine Kills wouldn't have existed without the Misfits. You can hear it in pop punk. You can hear it in some alternative rock. Bands like My Chemical Romance took direct cues from the theatrical aspects of the Misfits. AFI, Alkaline Trio, Avenged Sevenfold have all cited or shown clear influence from the Misfits and horror punk aesthetics. It also helped normalize theatricality in punk and metal, face paint, costumes, and stage personas. Today that's everywhere. Look at any festival around the world and it's really, really difficult to find any band that looked like, I don't know, the Ramones back in the days, just 4 to 5 dudes in clothes leaning against the wall. It's all spikes and masks and you name it. And that's basically all down to the Misfits. Horror punk proved that punk didn't have to be realistic or political. It could be fictional, it could be cinematic, and it could be fun. And that opened the door for countless creative subgenres. So why does horror punk still matter? Horror punk has always existed on the fringes. It's too weird for mainstream rock, it's too theatrical for hardcore punk, and it's too punk for goth. But that's exactly why it survives. It's a genre for outsiders within the outsider communities. If you're an outsider in the outsider community, this is where you land. It's either horror punk for punks, or grindcore for metalheads, or hardcore kids. There's always something more fringy than the fringes, and this is exactly where horror punk sits. It's a place where monster movies, comic books, and 3-chord punk songs collide in a beautiful way. And nearly 50 years after Misfits started it all, people are still painting their faces, turning up the distortion and singing about the undead. And that is horror punk. Thanks a bunch for tuning in again. We're on week 8 already. We're a third of the way there, basically. We're over a third of the way there. It's nuts. And to be honest, this has been great fun so far, and I cannot wait to finish this, to get back to making music and music tutorials. But also, I just need to take the moment to say thank you to all of you for subscribing, for all of you for commenting and hanging around and making this place feel a little bit special. Within an era of AI slop and an absolute lack of creativity, not only do we need a little bit more horror punk in our lives, I think we also need a little bit more of actual human connection, and this community is growing to be sort of that. It's super nice to see the same names pop up in the comment section and to have genuine discussions about music and how it relates to your life in the comments. It's super good. Thanks. Keep them coming. I appreciate you. Thanks. See you next week.